Let's talk again about the pandemic and aged care because it's so crucial. As you know, we've been warning about this since February, and I've said that the federal government, state governments and centre operators have fallen short. They didn't do enough early enough to protect aged care facilities. As difficult as it is to stop infections entering their systems once they're occurring in the community, there's more that could have been done sooner. Face masks for all employees, protocols to remove infected patients, bans on workers attending multiple centres and facilities. There's been a focus on these things, these reforms in recent weeks, but it should have happened months ago. This is almost the entirety of the problem in this country. Take away the aged care deaths, and we have about 100 deaths nationally. No lockdowns and no border closures. So Labor leader Anthony Albanese was right to make this attack last night on the ABC.
We know from international experience that the alarm bells should have been going off, saying that aged care was a particular issue because it was older people who were vulnerable to this disease. And then we had, of course, Dorothy Henderson Lodge in March, Newmarch House in April, reports there that went to the government that weren't made public, but that warned very clearly of what was necessary. Putting in place workforce numbers, putting in place protective equipment that wasn't available appropriately for nurses and other carers.
Fair enough, important stuff. We didn't learn the lessons quickly enough in this country, and the federal government's got to take its share of the blame. But watch what happens when Albanese is asked a very straightforward and reasonable question.
You seemed keen in your first answer to blame aged care failures all on Scott Morrison, but aged care deaths wouldn't have occurred in Victoria without community transmission or quarantine failure. And as the Victorian Premier has himself said, that buck stops with him. Wouldn't it be more honest of you to direct some of your anger as well towards the Victorian Labor Premier?
Well, let's be very clear, Lee. The Prime Minister stood in the courtyard on a Thursday after Parliament got up and waved around the rules for dealing with these issues, and aged care is clearly a federal responsibility.
It's a pandemic, Albo. It's a crisis. It's not time to play partisan politics. Yes, there's criticism to be made of the federal government, especially about aged care. The Prime Minister has even apologised. But your criticism rings pretty hollow if you're running a Labor mate's protection racket for Daniel Andrews. He stuffed up quarantine, made a hash of contact tracing, had lax rules for infected people, failed to provide the right information to the public, and then to top it all off, he's blamed the people of Victoria for all the problems and locked them down under a curfew. The Prime Minister picked up on this point in Parliament today.
What the Leader of the Opposition does seem to have here is a blind spot in what is happening in Victoria. He seems to be the only person in this country who thinks there has been no community outbreak of the coronavirus in Victoria.
It's true. Albanese can't have any credibility on his pandemic criticisms if he can't be upfront enough to recognise and learn from the shambles under the Andrews Labor government.